This is the Music History In-Depth podcast for March 19th through the 25th. On this week's show, we find out why March 19th is a depressing day in music history. We talk about the first major rock concert ever held that also became the shortest rock concert ever held. And we say happy birthday to two rock and roll legends who were both born on March 25th, exactly 5 years apart. When you go to a sports arena, any sports arena, inevitably, Ozzy Osbourne's Crazy Train comes on to pump up the crowd. You hear Ozzy's "All Aboard!" Then the bass and drums kick in under Ozzy's laugh, and of course the I. And then you hear that guitar. Oh, that guitar. That guitar drives that song, especially the guitar solo, which is one of the greatest guitar solos in the history of metal rock. And on March 19th, 1982, the guitarist who delivered that blistering solo was silenced forever. Randy Rhoads was born on December 6, 1956. He came from a music family studying music theory under his mother Dolores. In 1971, Randy and his brother went to see an Alice Cooper concert, and Randy was hooked. Randy got so good at playing guitar that by the age of 16, he was also teaching guitar at his mother's music school. He was also forming a band with his friend Kelly Garney. They recruited lead singer Kevin DuBrow and drummer Drew Force and called themselves Little Women, but then thankfully changed their name to Quiet Riot. Quiet Riot was creating a following in Southern California, but for some reason could not get a record deal in America. The best the band could do at the time was to release 2 albums overseas in Japan. Around that time, Ozzy Osbourne came calling. Ozzy was trying to form a new band after his parting with Black Sabbath and wondered if Randy would like to join him. Since Randy was upset that Quiet Riot wasn't going anywhere in America, Randy quit Quiet Riot and joined Ozzy's new band. It wasn't that easy, though. Ozzy's management wanted to keep the band all British, but once they heard Randy, they relented and gave him the gig. The new band was called the Blizzard of Oz. Oh, for the record, Quiet Riot would eventually get that elusive recording contract in America, and they would have a huge album called Metal Health, which had a couple of huge hits, a remake of Slade's Come On Feel the Noise and Bang Your Head. Lead singer Kevin DuBrow would later be fired by the band, but the band would reform in 2002, only to have DuBrow pass away from a cocaine overdose in 2007. In any event, Randy did not fit the stereotypical rock star image aside from maybe some long hair. He rarely drank and he never did drugs, although he was a big-time cigarette smoker. He was also very heavily influenced by classical music thanks to his music school upbringing. In his new band, he was allowed to showcase his influences, becoming one of the leaders of what would soon become known as neoclassical metal. In fact, Rhoads, for a time, thought about quitting Ozzy's band and going to UCLA to get his bachelor's degree in classical music. Fate, however, had other plans. On March 19, 1982, the band was on their tour bus driving to a music festival in Orlando, Florida from Knoxville, Tennessee. They stopped next to an airstrip in Leesburg, Florida to fix a problem on the bus. While everybody was waiting for the bus to get fixed, tour bus driver Andrew Aycock decided that he wanted to fly one of the small private planes at the airport, as Aycock was also a private plane pilot. Aycock took a Beechcraft F-35 airplane for a ride, unfortunately without the owner's permission. Most of the band was still asleep on the bus, but keyboardist Don Airey and tour manager Jake Duncan were awake, so they went for a quick ride with Aycock. That trip ended without incident. Then he took Randy, who was awake by then, and the band's makeup artist Rachel Youngblood up in the airplane. Aycock decided to start goofing off and tried buzzing the tour bus. He made 2 passes at the bus. Both went okay. Then he tried pass number 3. On the 3rd pass, things went horribly wrong. One of the wings of the plane clipped the bus, breaking the wing. At this point, both Randy and Rachel's heads crashed through the windshield. If they were still alive at that point, they weren't for much longer. The plane went out of control, clipped a tree, crashed into a garage, and burst into flames. Randy's body had to be identified by dental records as it had been burned beyond recognition. It was later revealed that Aycock had been doing cocaine all night prior to his fateful flight. Rolling Stone magazine lists Randy Rhoads at number 36 on its list of greatest guitarists of all time. I would probably have moved him up a lot higher, but that's just me. He was a guitarist, mixing different styles and bringing classical music to heavy metal, as other guitarists like Yngwie Malmsteen and Steve Vai eventually would. Randy Rhoads, along with the makeup artist Rachel Youngblood and the pilot, tragically killed in a plane crash on March 19th, 1982. Randy was 25 years old at the time. Next, Landrew the Love Child, man of golden words. Both are nicknames for this next person. If Neil Young is the godfather of grunge music, then this man was its prodigal son. He was the one who was supposed to be the next big thing. Well, if only. Andrew Wood was born on January 8, 1966 in Columbus, Mississippi, until his family moved to Bainbridge Island near Seattle, Washington. From a very early age, Andrew was involved in music. When he was 14, he formed the band Malfunction. Their style of music was tilted more towards the glam rock style, and much like glam rock personas of before, the band had on stage alter egos. Andrew chose Landrew the Love Child. The group developed a small following in the Seattle, Washington underground, opening up for still unknown bands like Soundgarden, whose lead singer Chris Cornell was also for a time Woods' roommate, and also opened up for the band Green River. Andrew also unfortunately started having a serious drug problem by the time he was 19 and went into rehab for it for the first time back in 1985. In 1986, supposedly clean, Malfunction recorded a couple of demos and shopped them around to local record labels, including the now famous Sub Pop, who unfortunately turned them down at the time. The group finally called it quits in 1988 without ever releasing an album. In 1988, another young grunge band also called it quits, the aforementioned Green River. Green River had members Stone Gossard and Jeff Ament, who hooked up with Andrew along with Malfunction's drummer Regan Hager. They sometimes performed under the name Lords of the Wasteland. The group also added Bruce Fairweather, who had been in Green River as well. And in 1989, they decided to form a group and called it Mother Love Bone, after replacing Regan Hager with drummer Greg Gilmore, who was in the band's 10-Minute Warning and Skin Yard. Finally, in 1989, Woods got his wish when Mother Love Bone was signed to a record deal. It wasn't with Sub Pop, though. It was with Polygram Records, who put them on their subsidiary label Stardog. The group recorded and released an EP called Shine. While they were touring to support the EP, they recorded what would become their full-length debut album, Apple. Andrew also checked himself into rehab again, hoping to get clean in time for the release of the Apple album. 1990 opened with the band waiting for the record label to release the album. While they waited, they did some shows in Seattle to keep fresh. From all accounts, Andrew was ready to hit the big time. Andrew was the perfect showman. He had rock and roll swagger and onstage charisma that was unmatched by anybody in the grunge rock community. If ever there was one guy who could have handled and wanted all that fame that went with being Seattle's breakout star, it was Andrew. In fact, he would have eaten it up. It wasn't Kurt Cobain, that's for sure. Not Lane Staley, not Chris Cornell, not even Eddie Vedder. Andrew had even stopped doing drugs. Well, so people thought anyway. On March 16, 1990, Woods' girlfriend found him passed out from a heroin overdose. Andrew was rushed to the hospital, where for a little while it looked like he was going to recover. The heroin, unfortunately, had cost him his brain functions, and on March 19, 1990, Andrew Wood was taken off of life support and passed away. So, what happened to everybody else after that? Well, Andrew's ex-roommate, Chris Cornell, you already know about. He continued with Soundgarden before joining up with members of Rage Against the Machine as Audioslave and then getting back to Soundgarden until his untimely death in 2017. However, right after Woods' death, he wrote a couple of songs, and then he got together with Mother Love Bone members Stone Gossard and Jeff Ament to do a tribute album together. They recruited drummer Matt Cameron, guitarist Mike McCready, and another singer named Eddie Vedder, and released their tribute album under the name Temple of the Dog. During this time, everybody in that group except for Chris Cornell was also recording an album together. Eddie was on the Temple of the Dog album because he had earlier passed an audition to be the lead singer of a group that the rest of the guys had started. They named that group Mookie Blaylock after the basketball player, but later changed it to what we now know them as today, Pearl Jam. As for Mother Love Bone's music, Polygram Records put all the tracks together from both Shine and Apple and released them as one album and called it simply Mother Love Bone. There were also songs and tributes to Wood on the soundtrack to Cameron Crowe's movie Singles. What would have been? What would have been? Andrew Wood, lead singer of Malfunction and Mother Love Bone, the prodigal son of grunge music, passed away from a heroin overdose on March 19th, 1990, at the age of 24. And now you know why March 19th is such a depressing day in music history. Before we continue, we'd like to tell you about the Music History Today podcast, where we go over the events that happened on that particular day in music history. The Music History Today podcast drops every single day, including weekends, on this podcast network. Now, back to the Music History In-Depth podcast. On March 21st, 1952, an event happened that today is so normal that people don't even give it a second thought. Back then, what happened changed music as we know it. First, though, a little background. Alan Freed was a DJ who got his start at WAKR Radio in Akron, Ohio, where he played standards and jazz records. He stayed with the station until 1951, when he moved to Cleveland, Ohio. Because Akron and Cleveland were close together, Alan had a non-compete clause in his contract that said that he couldn't compete in a close market in the daytime period for a few years at least. That meant that he had no other choice but to take the overnight shift at his new radio station, WJW, in Cleveland, Ohio. Freed, however, made the most of the time period. A few years earlier, he met Leo Mintz, spelled M-I-N-T-Z. Mintz owned Record Rendezvous in Cleveland, which had started selling R&B records. Mintz figured that he would have a huge black clientele for the records, but a funny thing happened. It was actually white kids who were coming in and buying those records. When Mintz mentioned to Freed what was going on, that gave Freed an idea. Freed had been given the slot at the station with Mintz being his chief sponsor. So, Freed started playing the R&B records. He called his show the Moondog House and called his fan base Moondoggers. His theme song was a record called Moondog. Moondog was actually the stage name of a New York street musician, and Freed liked the name, so he used it. Sort of copyright infringed it. Whatever. Soon, Freed was extremely popular. He brought a hip style to his DJing, using the phrase rock and roll so much that he's credited with popularizing it in the mainstream, even though that very same phrase had been black slang for sex for years. Think of it as woke or whatever these days. In any event, to Freed's credit, he never played the whitewashed versions of R&B songs like Pat Boone redoing Little Richard records. So, what's a DJ to do when he gets ultra popular and is on the cusp of national popularity? He puts on a dance, of course. Actually, he billed it as a dance. It was really a concert. He called it the Moondog Coronation Ball. Catchy title. The concert was to be held at the Cleveland Arena on March 21st, 1952. Freed would host. The bands were all local acts, no one famous. Paul Williams and the Hucklebuckers were the opening act. Other acts were to be Tiny Grimes, the Dominoes, Veretta Dillard, Danny Cobb, and the Rockin' Highlanders, who were a black instrumental group who wore Scottish kilts because... Actually, I'm still confused by that one. Who thought that one up? I mean, I realize it was 1952 and apparently leather jackets and blue jeans weren't a thing at that time yet, but kilts? Really? Then again, Samuel L. Jackson did manage to pull off the look in a movie not that long ago, so what the hell do I know? Anyway, back on topic. There were a couple of serious problems with this dance. The first problem was that there were a lot of counterfeit tickets going around. Boy, that sounds familiar. That hasn't changed in 70 years. The second was that the arena only fit 10,000 people. On the night of the concert, over 20,000 of them showed up. Paul Williams took the stage first, and right after his first song was finished, he got off the stage. Then the concert was over. The fire department saw the crowd and feared a riot breaking out if 20,000 people crowded into a place that only held 10,000 people, so the fire department shut it down with the help of fire hoses and more than a few policemen. I mean, these guys did kind of come prepped. In any event, even though it was over right after it got started, literally, it is still credited as being the first rock and roll concert ever held. It also clocks in at probably the shortest rock and roll concert ever held at approximately 2 minutes. I mean, even a Kanye rant followed by getting off the stage is a little bit longer than that. As far as Freed went, he had to issue an apology the very next day. His show also went national, being picked up by WINS Radio in New York City, among other radio stations. Freed became a driving force in bringing rock and roll to the masses, even showing up in a few movies until a payola scandal doomed his career in the early 1960s. Alan Freed passed away from disease brought on by alcoholism on January 20th, 1965 at the age of 43. So, if you ever wanted to know why the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is located in Cleveland instead of New York City, Miami, Memphis, Nashville, or any of the other major musical cities, now you know. The world's first, and probably shortest, rock and roll concert, the Moondog Coronation Ball, held in Cleveland, Ohio at the Cleveland Arena on March 21st, 1952. Next, the history of the major artist Las Vegas residency is almost as old as Las Vegas itself. I'm not talking about acts who have had shows forever and a day there, like Siegfried and Roy, Charo, and the iconic Lola Falana. Loved Lola Falana. She was amazing. I'm talking about Wayne Newton, Frank Sinatra, and the rest of his Rat Pack cohorts, Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. There's also, of course, the Elvis Presley Vegas Elvis era with the white jumpsuit, which is a meme all unto itself. See, the trend had died down during the rough times in Vegas during the switchover from mob-controlled resorts to corporate resorts like MGM. Things started to get better as Steve Wynn opened up family-themed resorts like Treasure Island. The Palms Resort helped to bring the celebrity crowd back in the late 1990s with all the partying and the DJs and whatnot. But still, high-quality popular music artists stayed away and left Vegas to Wayne Newton, as the joke was that Vegas was where popular artists went to play when they weren't popular anymore and needed to make a little extra cash without touring. That all changed on March 25th, 2003, when Celine Dion started her first residency called Celine Dion A New Day at Caesars Palace. Caesars renovated their Coliseum venue just for her to put on her stage production. The contract was originally set for 3 years, $100 million plus 50% of all profits. It was stretched out to 5 years and grossed over $385 million from 717 shows. In today's money, that works out to about $543 million, give or take. After she finished her last show on December 15th, 2007 from the original contract, Celine took a few months off, and then she did a world tour for a few years. However, in 2011, Vegas came calling again, and she did a second residency, which ran for 6 years until 2017, with short breaks here and there, of course. After artists saw just how much money Celine made doing these shows and doing them in the same spot, show after show, and all of it without the rigor of touring, other artists suddenly wanted their own residency deals. Elton John had one, Shania Twain had one, and the trend still continues to this very day, with Katy Perry, Adele, and Usher all doing one. Celine's residency also helped to usher in the era of the superstar club DJ residencies a decade later, with DJs like Steve Aoki and Tiesto doing residencies. The residency idea even carried all the way over to New York City, where Billy Joel did a once-a-month residency at Madison Square Garden for well over a decade until 2024, before doing what every New Yorker eventually does and retired to live in the 6th borough, better known these days as the state of Florida. Can Taylor Swift be far behind with her own residency in Vegas? Or maybe she'll even just start a trend and do a residency in, say, Nashville or Memphis. Probably in about a decade or so. Celine Dion opening her first Las Vegas residency and changing Las Vegas entertainment forever on March 25th, 2003. Finally, we're going to celebrate the lives of two legendary Rock and Roll Hall of Famers who share the exact same birth date. However, they're 5 years apart. Ladies first. When you think of great singers whose work has stood the test of time, then Aretha Franklin has to be considered at least in the top 5. Rolling Stone magazine named her the greatest singer, male or female, of all time. The Queen of Soul had 77 songs hit the Billboard Hot 100 singles chart, 17 of which went top 10. She was the first female artist ever to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and it happened in their second class. She won 18 Grammy Awards and sold over 75 million records worldwide. She was also the recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, at least 12 honorary college degrees, including more than a few doctorates, and was given both the Grammy Legend Award and the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. She sang everything from gospel to pop to R&B to even classical music and opera. Aretha was born on March 25th, 1942 in Memphis, Tennessee, and started out as a youngster singing gospel in her father C.L. Franklin's church back in Detroit, Michigan. Her father was a minister who became a bit of a celebrity in the Detroit area due to his energetic sermons. Because of this, as a child, Aretha knew people such as gospel legend Mahalia Jackson, who sometimes babysat her, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who she sang for before some of his rallies. And of course, he was also a minister down in Georgia, Atlanta to be precise, Ebenezer Baptist Church. Aretha's childhood, despite knowing a lot of celebrities, was not an easy one. Her mom and dad divorced when she was 6 years old due to her father's multiple affairs. Her mom died when Aretha was 10 years old. By the time Aretha was 14, she already had 2 children. When she turned 18, Aretha decided to switch from singing gospel to R&B, following in her friend, singer Sam Cooke's footsteps. She first recorded with Columbia Records. In those 6 years, she only found mid-level success at best. In 1967, she went to Atlantic Records, and it was there where Aretha made her mark. Her first album at Atlantic, released on March 10th, was I Never Loved a Man the Way That I Love You. That album had the hits I Never Loved a Man the Way That I Love You, Do Right Man, Do Right Woman, Baby, 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 and her signature song, Respect. The irony of singing this song about empowerment was that at the exact same time, Aretha was in an abusive marriage with her manager, Ted White, whom she finally divorced a couple years later. Aretha wanted to record with the famed Muscle Shoals rhythm section at Fame Studios in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. She got to the studio and recorded I Never Loved a Man. Her recording session only lasted 1 day, though, as her manager/husband at the time got into a fistfight with Muscle Shoals owner Rick Hall on the first day of recording. She left the next day. Still, the vocals of the song were finished on the first day, so they were put onto that song. Her signature song, Respect, was originally recorded by Otis Redding. Aretha and producer Jerry Wexler added the sax solo in the middle, and the Sock It To Me line was added by Aretha and her sister Carolyn. The album itself went to number 1 on the Billboard R&B chart and number 2 on the pop charts. The single Respect was number 1 on the pop chart, while the single I Never Loved a Man peaked at number 9. When it first came out, it was given decent reviews, except that some reviewers thought the musicians on the album could have been better. Time changes everything. This album set the stage for Aretha's rise, with her next couple of albums cementing her legacy. Her next album, Aretha Arrives, arrived only 5 months after her Atlantic Records debut album and had the hit Baby I Love You. Columbia Records, her former label, of course, tried to capitalize on Aretha's newfound success by releasing a compilation album called Take a Look only a month after Aretha Arrives. But unless you're a huge fan of Aretha's and need every single thing she's ever put out, you could probably skip that one. The album Lady Soul was her third album released by Atlantic in less than a year. Aretha started recording that album on February 16, 1967 at Atlantic Studios in New York City. Legendary producer Jerry Wexler was at the producing helm for this album. Aretha had some star power to help out this time around, and among the guys on guitar were Eric Clapton and Bobby Womack, and singing backup vocals were Aretha's sister and gospel singer and mother of Whitney Houston, Cicely Houston. The big singles off of this album were You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman, which was written by Carole King, along with Chain of Fools, and Since You've Been Gone, not the Kelly Clarkson version. The album was released on January 22, 1968, and went to number 2 on the Billboard Albums chart. Lady Soul is considered one of the greatest albums of all time on a lot of different best-of lists. Her next albums, Aretha Now and Aretha in Paris, kept her on a roll with hits like Rocksteady and Daydreaming. And then she started hitting the speed bumps that go along with a long career, with a bunch of her albums towards the end of the 1970s. At the end of 1979, Aretha and Atlantic Records parted ways. In 1980, Aretha signed with legendary record label head Clive Davis's new record label, Arista Records. Her first act with the new label was to film her part in the Blues Brothers movie. Her 1980 album, Aretha Did Okay, and yielded the hits United Together and her version of Otis Redding's song, I Can't Turn You Loose. Her follow-up, Love All the Hurt Away, did pretty well, becoming her first gold record in years. Her 1982 album, Jump to It, did even better, with the song Jump to It becoming a big hit. 1985's album, Who's Zoomin' Who, was her breakout album in the Arista era. Aretha by now had switched her sound to a more pop sound. It worked like a charm in the 80s with big hits Freeway of Love with the saxophone of Mr. Clarence Clements, the big man of Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. She also had the big hits Who's Zoomin' Who and her worldwide hit duet with George Michael, I Knew You Were Waiting for Me. Who's Zoomin' Who was the zenith of Aretha's post-Atlantic career, going platinum. In 1987, she was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. After that, while she did albums that were mid-level in terms of sales, she settled into what we like to call legend status, doing tours and special performances. There was, for instance, the 1988 Grammy Awards, where she filled in for Luciano Pavarotti, who was ill the night of the ceremony. The ceremony producers asked Aretha to step in and perform the song Nessun Dorma, which she had performed with Pavarotti only a couple nights before at a charity function. Aretha rehearsed with the orchestra for a little while, figured that she could sing it in the key that the orchestra already knew it in, and then delivered a performance of the ages that night, which is still talked about to this day, which garnered an extremely long standing ovation from the Grammy audience. I mean, seriously, who knew that Aretha could sing opera? Check it out on YouTube. It was an amazing performance and an amazing time in music history. As the new century rolled around, Aretha continued touring, but her health concerns began to take their toll. She ended up canceling shows and shortening tours. Her final full concert was held on September 3rd, 2017, although she did give one more performance for Elton John's AIDS charity concert on November 7th, 2017. And that is where the whole March 25th thing is going to tie in, which you'll see in a minute. Aretha announced performance dates for 2018, but those dates were postponed, never to be fulfilled. On August 16, 2018, on the same day in history that the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, passed away in 1977, the world lost the Queen of Soul at the age of 76 in 2018. The Queen of Soul herself, Miss Aretha Franklin, born on March 25th, 1942. Now, here's where that Elton John part comes in. Reginald Kenneth Dwight, stage name Elton John, of course, was born on March 25th, 1947, in Middlesex, England, exactly 5 years to the day that Aretha Franklin was born. Elton started out as a pianist in the local pubs before forming the band Bluesology. After answering an ad placed by an A&R guy from Liberty Records for a songwriter, he was asked to put music to a bunch of lyrics by a guy by the name of Bernie Taupin. And that began one of the longest songwriting partnerships in music history. Elton's first album was Empty Sky, which didn't do all that much. His self-titled follow-up album did much better, spawning the classics Border Song and Your Song. Madman Across the Water and Tumbleweed Connection furthered his ride. From 1969 to 1974, Elton had put out 6 studio albums, a soundtrack, and a live album, a stunning volume of work in only 5 years. He had also begun a streak of #1 albums, Honky Chateau in 1972, and Don't Shoot Me, I'm Only the Piano Player in the beginning of 1973. Apparently, not one to rest on his laurels, he and Bernie decided that they should record their next album in Jamaica, my home country. The Rolling Stones had recorded their album, Goat's Head Soup, in Jamaica, and Elton loved the album. Plus, it's Jamaica. Warm tropical sun, island breezes, great food, reggae music, friendly people, half my relatives. Hell, my mom's Jamaican. How bad could it be? Turns out, kind of bad. For starters, the country was going through some political tensions as an election the year before had swept Prime Minister Michael Manley to power over very unpopular incumbent Prime Minister Hugh Shearer. But the economic conditions were such that violence broke out regularly. Add to that, George Foreman and Joe Frazier were having a boxing match on the island at the time, which created a lot of congestion. Remember, it is a small island. It is less the size of the state of Connecticut. To go along with all of that, the studio equipment had issues. The only good thing to come out of the Jamaican experience was that Elton and Bernie managed to write all of the songs for the album very quickly. Bernie took almost 3 weeks to write the lyrics, and Elton took only 3 days to write the music. Plus, they got a really nice tan. After this perfect storm of craziness, the guys decided to go back to Europe to record the album. They ended up at the Château d'Orville in France, which was where they recorded their last 2 albums. The album itself ended up being long, although it really wasn't planned that way. It was only supposed to be a single album, but since they recorded 18 songs, they decided to make it a double album. The album was originally called Silent Movies, Talking Pictures, and Vodka and Tonics before they settled on the actual title, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. It was released on October 5th, 1973. And despite the fact that 6 of the album's songs are considered classic rock staples, at the time the album was originally released, only 3 songs were released as singles in America. Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting, and Benny and the Jets. Candle in the Wind and Harmony were released in Great Britain. Funeral for a Friend and Love Lies Bleeding wasn't released due to its length of over 11 minutes, although you now hear it on the radio on the regular. In fact, for the radio DJs, it's a lot like Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. It's become the bathroom break song, where you put it on, go to the bathroom, and it's still playing by the time you're done. The album became the best-selling album of his career, with over 8 million certified copies sold in America alone. It was in the top 10 in 9 different countries and number 1 in 4 of them. It was the biggest-selling album of 1974 and is considered by many to be his magnum opus. From there, Elton went on a roll. To date, he has put out 31 studio albums, 4 live albums, 7 soundtrack albums, including his Academy Award-winning work on The Lion King. And he has sold over 350 million albums worldwide and counting. Of course, if you've seen his biopic Rocket Man and also the documentary that Disney Plus now has, then you know all about his private life, his drug problems and rehab, near bankruptcy, etc., etc. But hey, rock and roll. He's still considered to be one of the greatest artists of all time. In fact, even though he has officially retired from touring after over 50 years, he's more popular than ever, as his last album, which was 2021's The Lockdown Sessions, went top 10, and his duet, Cold Heart, with Dua Lipa, went to number 1, opening up his work to yet another generation of fans. For the record, I don't think he's done touring. In fact, my prediction is that he'll announce his I'm Not Dead Yet tour by 2026. He still performs, though. He was just performing at a Vanity Fair party for his foundation, the Elton John AIDS Foundation, this year alone, 2025, at the Academy Awards. Elton's Princess Diana version of Candle in the Wind is the biggest selling single of all time worldwide. He's had way too many hit singles to name here from virtually every decade, everything from Your Song all the way up to Cold Heart and beyond. I don't think he's actually done yet. He had 19 top 10 songs from the 1970s, 7 top 10 songs from the 1980s, 4 top 10 songs from the 1990s, none in the 2000s though, although he did have a few in England during that time period. 1 top 10 song in the 2010s and 2 so far in the 2020s. He's won a Tony Award for the Broadway musical Aida, an Academy Award for The Lion King, 6 Grammy Awards, and finally completed the EGOT by winning an Emmy Award in 2023. He was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II and has been given similar national awards from the countries of France and the United States. Plus, there's his important work with the Elton John AIDS Foundation. The man is more than a legend. He's an institution and a national and worldwide treasure. The Rocket Man, Sir Elton John, born 5 years to the day after Aretha Franklin on March 25th, 1947. And that is it for the Music History In-Depth podcast for March 19th through the 25th. Thank you very, very much for listening and or watching if you're on YouTube or Spotify.